Wonderful. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am really delighted to have finally meet Dr. Ian K. Smith in person. We have done a virtual event together, but this is the first time he's come to the store, and I'm pretty sure it was the lure of golf in Arizona that got you here and not the book event, yes?
Well, since I live in Chicago, where the series takes place, which if I left was maybe 18 degrees, any chance I get to come to a warmer climate, you don't have to twist my arm for that. I can tell you that.
You're not playing golf while you're here?
I'm actually not playing golf. I was in Tuscany. I just got back 26 hours ago. I went to see a friend because I want to write a love story in Tuscany. I've already and I went for 3 or 4 days. I stayed in this beautiful place. A friend of mine owns a villa there, and I created a love story that starts off in New York and ends up in Tuscany.
It sounds absolutely wonderful. But, you know, yours is an interesting journey because you're actually a number one New York Times bestseller in nonfiction
Yeah.
for your work in nutrition and medicine. So tell us what's going on there because you have a book coming in January.
Yeah. So my bailiwick has been health and wellness and diet, and it's treated me very well, and I hope it's treated my readers very well. But that's how I started. I was a columnist for Time Magazine way back when, the heydays of Time Magazine, and I got this email when I was a columnist. I got this email from a editor at Random House, and she said to me, "Oh, would you like to write books?" Of course, who doesn't want to write books, right? I said yes. And so she said, "Okay, we want to sign you up to write books, and you can choose whatever you want." And so I said, "Well, I want to write about nutrition and diet because so many of my responses from my column are people asking to lose weight. And I'm spent all this time trying to research for them because the stuff that's out there is garbage." So that started it. So I wrote this book called The Take Control Diet, which sold maybe 2 copies. My mother and another relative bought it. But it got me on the path to trying to help people fix nutritional issues, weight issues. And then I wrote this little book. This is weird, isn't it? Publishing is weird. It is.
Patrick and I are cracking up. Yes, publishing is weird.
Yeah.
35 years into this,
Yeah.
we have still think it's weird.
I mean, listen to this. So I'd published with Random House, traditionally published. I felt all big shotish because I got a great book deal. The book that became a bestseller, number one bestseller, that stayed on for, I don't know, 20 something weeks, was a book I first independently published because the publisher rejected it. How about that? The publisher said no to it. And I said, I thought the publisher was going to want it. The publisher didn't want it. And I almost didn't publish it until my brother convinced me. He said, "Screw the publishers. Just publish it yourself." Now, this is back in the day when it wasn't easy to publish. It's easy to publish now. There are programs on Amazon. But this was when you really had to kind of pull yourself up and try to do it. The other part of it was that I had such pride that I was this traditionally published author. You know, it was so lowbrow to self-publish, you know. So I didn't want to do it. And he convinced me. He said, "Ian, you have a fan base, and they'll buy it if you put it out there for them." And so I called my friend Bill Getty at The View, who was the EP at the time when Barbara Walters was there. And I said, "Hey, Bill, can I come on? I want to publish this book called The Fat Smash Diet." And Bill said, "Come on in." And it broke. I was selling it on I lived on the Upper East Side of New York City. I was selling it on my website. I had a little website I created. And when I left The View, because The View was live show, by the time I left the West Side and got back to my apartment to see if there were any sales, my site crashed.
Wow.
And then and then I was selling so many books by myself that I noticed how you have a big operation here, for those that have not been here, about how you ship books. I was using my apartment as a shipping center by myself, by the way, and trying to still do TV. And so I was getting so many orders I couldn't respond fast enough. And you know what happens when people aren't happy
Yes,
with
we've
that.
had some experience with that.
Yeah. So I met a guy at a golf tournament who was the COO of St. Martin's, and I called him up and I said, "Hey, I got this book I've been self-publishing and I can't keep track of the orders. Do you think maybe you guys want to take it over?" He said, "Come on into the office." I went down to the Flatiron Building the next week. They bought the book on the spot because of how many books I had sold myself, by the way, basically out of my trunk, out of my apartment. And they republished it basically with the same thing. Number one. for weeks and weeks and weeks. But publishing is weird like that.
Well, it truly is, right. So, what made you decide to write fiction?
I've always wanted to write fiction. In fact, fiction is what I first wanted to write. When I moved to New York as a grad student at Columbia, I actually was trying to publish a book that was based on my experiences in one of Harvard's secret societies called the Ancient Nine. Okay? And so I was lucky enough to get an editor, Marianne Strong, who was a quintessential socialite in New York. I didn't know how much of she was, by the way. She had a great history. I didn't know that. I was a kid at the time. But anyway, she took me on, and we tried to sell this book. And unfortunately, we didn't sell the book, but she believed in me, and she kept saying, keep working at it, keep working at it. So that went to the side. My medical career took off. I started working for Time. So when I actually got a chance to publish, I published nonfiction because it was kind of in my wheelhouse at the time. But my love for fiction was always there before nonfiction. Fast forward, this is a really, fast forward, one of my books that I had only written a manuscript for, somehow it got to Germany and to that Frankfurt Book Festival, and someone bought it. And I got a check in the mail from my agent saying, someone bought this book, one of my novels. I said, what do you mean? I didn't submit anything. It was a really big paycheck for me, and it saved me at the time. And that was the first when I started doing fiction. I mean, but it was original what I wanted to do. Nonfiction happened, but I love fiction. I love creating story. I've always loved fiction. I've always loved mystery since I was a little kid. I used to read Encyclopedia Brown, which was my favorite, and a book called The Great Brain, which was also fantastic. But those are my books.
So I can't really call you an accidental author, which I was sort of getting to, but no. So Ashe Gayne, you've written 4 of them.
Yeah.
You wrote 2 of them for one publisher, and then you moved over to HarperCollins,
Yeah.
and it's Emmasted in print. That's the one where we met over your third
Yes.
book.
Yeah.
Right, and we did a Zoom event. I love the Ashe Gayne series because I should talk to the camera, sorry, because I am from Chicago, like Ian, although I grew up in Winnetka. I don't know what part of Chicago
You grew up in the fancy North Shore.
I did.
I
right.
live on the gritty South Side.
Okay. Well, my husband's family, the Rosenwalds, actually, that is where they come from.
The Rosenwalds?
I'm married to Julius Rosenwald's great-grandson. Right. So
Jeez, I know their house.
yes, you do.
The Rosenwald house,
Exactly.
the Rosenwald mansion.
Yeah, and the planetarium and the
Yes,
museum and
yes.
Ravinia, all that. Right.
Wow.
But
Okay.
anyway,
That's nice.
I'm always surprised about why more people aren't writing books set in Chicago, particularly crime fiction. There's Sarah
Well, don't
Paretsky,
encourage
who we
them.
all know. No,
I
come
don't want
on.
the competition.
It isn't competition. I think it, don't you, Patrick? I think they sort of stick. If you have like 2 people writing about Boston, then it's better to have 4 people. It makes it more familiar. Yeah.
Well, I chose Chicago because, as you say, no one except for Sarah, who I got a chance to meet, by the way.
And
who's
Michael
wonderful.
Harvey, who is a wonderful author.
Yes,
But
but
he hardly ever writes a book.
I know.
I know.
I know. But I wanted to me, Chicago is not just a great place for mysteries. Chicago itself is a character, right? The city itself, the way the city is built, it's just it's built on the lake. To me, it's the most beautiful skyline, and I'm a New York guy, but Chicago has the most beautiful skyline because it's built on the lake, and that the vistas are just ridiculous. But also the history of Chicago, the segregation, which, by the way, some of those lines still exist in Chicago. Old Mayor Daley built it that way. You know, the way he did the transportation system was to keep people separate. So the north, you have the north and the North Shore. You have the west. You have the south. The south was mostly black. The west was mostly immigrant, and the north was mostly white. My wife's grandfather, who lived to be 100, lived in Chicago for 90 years, and he had only gone to the north side maybe 3 times.
No, I can easily believe that. I'll tell you something I learned, which really surprised me. There's an author called Naomi Hirahara, and she wrote a wonderful, well, there are 3 of them now, 2 anyway, books about the Japanese in World War II in the internment. Do you know that they moved a whole lot of the Japanese from internment camps in California to right around Navy Pier? And during the war, there was this very large Japanese kind of
Navy Pier?
Yeah. I know. I had to keep looking up the address because I thought that can't be right. And then, but it is right. And I thought that was, I mean, I was a child then. So, okay, I was born in 1940. So I don't have any clear memories of this. But I was, what's it called? Clark and Division. That's the name of the book. So
Oh
there was
wow,
this
that's a great
great
title.
large Japanese intern population in Chicago at Clark and Division. But I am old enough to remember the Great Migration
You
because,
remember the Great Migration?
well, I remember it in the war and after the war. And the reason I know that is that most of the people who did domestic work in the north part of Chicago came from the south side on the train. And we had a person called Minnie, whom I really loved.
Mm.
And she was part of that. She was from Mississippi. I don't think she was literate, but she could manage,
She
to,
managed in.
yeah. And so that was, you're right. I mean, it was a
There's a
tremendous gulf there because,
yeah.
I went to New Trier,
Mm-hmm.
and if I
I know
remember
New
right,
Trier.
there were 3 black students at New Trier, and Anne Margaret, who was my buddy in class, and she was there because her parents were Norwegian immigrants, and they lived in the garage
The Anne
apartment.
Margaret.
The Anne Margaret, right?
Jeez.
She lived in the garage apartment of the house that her mother worked in.
Wow.
So it
Wow.
was Anne Margaret and 3 other people, and then the rest of us were all the rest of us. Who
So
knew?
yeah, it's interesting. So I've always been intrigued by that dynamic. By the way, the dynamic of a domestic staff member having bonds and relationship, close familiar relationships with the family, particularly the kids that they work with. In fact, I explore that in The Ancient Nine, which is the book about my experiences in Harvard Secret Society. The one of the main characters is an heir to the Winthrop fortune. He's at Harvard, but his closest relationship is to his cook. It's not to his mom. It's not to his father. It's to his cook. His cook basically raised him, and he has an immense affinity for her. And I show in the book that when he goes back home, which he must do as a ritual once a month, he must go back to Beacon Hill to the Winthrop mansion and have dinner with his family. He purposely always enters and his father is, typical kind of aristocratic, old school kind of guy. The rule of the house is that no family member can ever enter the house from the back, that the servants enter that way, the staff enter that way. And because he just despises his dad so much because of all this stuff, he purposely always comes home through the back. But he also goes to the back because the first person he wants to see is the cook, because that's who he
Yeah,
really loves.
that's really
Anyway,
nice.
that's in the ancient. So I explore that dynamic. I explore because it's a real dynamic, and a dynamic I didn't learn about until I moved to New York, and I was always intrigued that you had these very wealthy white families, but their kids were being taken care of by black, largely uneducated women, and I just thought that was wow. Like in no other situation would you see this kind of mix together, but they're taking care of the most precious thing they have, which are their kids. I mean, that says a lot to
Well,
me.
the British used to hand off their children to, to other people to raise. That's been, so it's not totally
But the
surprising.
irony of it, though,
Yeah.
like they they would never be seen at the same restaurants or in social outings, but the person making sure their kid is safe is, I just find that to be very I found to be interesting, intellectually and from a sociological standpoint. But I'd never seen that before until I moved to New York, because where I came from, there weren't nannies. Everyone watched their own kids.
All right. So when we're
Yes.
talking about Ashe Gayne, the difference between what you're talking about and Ashe Gayne, who is like, I mean, he's a rich, cool, his father's a distinguished psychiatrist. They are like black royalty in Chicago. And he's a private eye because he didn't want to take the hierarchical gruff
Hmm.
stuff of the police department,
Yeah.
right? So he's a great character. And your Chicago is so different than the one I grew up in or the one you're talking about
So
in the book, anyway.
yeah, I wanted to create a character I'd never seen before. So I wanted a character who was a younger, hipper private eye, right? I grew up on Columbo. I grew up on Magnum PI. Barnaby Jones. I grew up on those guys, right? But I wanted someone who was younger and hipper, and I wanted an African American guy who was educated, but also who was always going to be authentic in who he was. He's a guy who's determined to get justice. He doesn't care whether or not he's in peril or not. He's going to get justice. He's also a guy that moves very easily to the North Shore. He's very comfortable. He's comfortable in the gritty South Side or the West Side. It doesn't matter where he is. He is always Ashe Gayne. He's a guy that women love, and guys would want to have pizza and beer and watch a football game with. So this is the kind of guy I wanted to create. And I also wanted a guy who would quote Shakespeare 1 minute and can quote a rapper the next minute. I mean,
Well, he certainly does that. I love the sports too. There's a lot of Chicago sports in this, the Bears, right? Almost the coldest night of my entire life when my father took me to see the Bears play in Soldiers Field, which is built right on Lake Michigan.
Right.
So when the wind turns and it whistles
Oh,
into
my
Soldiers Field, which is built kind of in a Roman style with arches, so there's no barrier to the wind coming. I'm telling you, I was a popsicle. I can still remember.
Are you the reason why we've been so bad for all these years?
Oh,
Did you
Lord.
give us a curse or
I
something?
didn't. No, my dad was an All-American at Northwestern, and he was a Big Ten official for 25 years. He played defense, so he
Oh,
was
wow.
an umpire. And, his idea of a really good time was when he, wasn't actually working to go to football games. I mean, he was that guy.
I think that another reason why I wanted to set this series in Chicago is because Chicago has everything. It has sports, it has great restaurants, it has wealth, it has poverty, it has violence, it has generosity. It just has everything. And I think that kind of setting is wonderful for mysteries. And the beauty of Ashe Gayne and the way I set it up is that Ashe Gayne, as you alluded to, used to work for Chicago Police Department, CPD. He leaves because he won't participate in the cover-up of an unarmed shooting. He won't participate in it. It's just against his moral compass. So he leaves, but he gets a settlement from the city, which makes him financially independent, so he's okay. So he doesn't have to take cases. He only takes cases that he wants to take and that intrigue him. And most of the time he says no to cases, and somehow he gets dragged into a case. The other thing is he's a obsessed, fanatical golfer. And so most of the time people are coming to him at the wrong time of the year when he's trying to get his handicap down. And so he just says, listen, I can't take these cases.
I know. I've actually, in my youth, played some of the golf courses that you take him to. I really love it. Yeah, Chicago's a big golf town, and there are, lots and lots of country clubs. There are here, too, as you know, with different membership. I mean, some of them, Green Acres was the Jewish club, and Exmoor Country Club was the Catholic club, and
They all had identities, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
they all had identities, but they had phenomenal golf courses, and actually Chicago climate is very good for golf. What hurt a lot of the golf courses? Here's a side that wouldn't occur to you. It was when Dutch elm disease struck. Because a lot of the golf courses in Chicago, a lot of the hazards, if you go to Augusta and you see the trees, and some of the most beautiful golf courses were just absolutely ravaged when the Dutch elm disease took down the trees. Yeah.
Yeah, there are tons of courses. I played a lot of them, not enough, but I played a lot of them, and it's fun. And I wanted a character who is a golfer, and he likes vintage cars, and I just think Ashe Gayne. I know I wrote the guy, but I still think he's just a cool guy, and I think I was talking to the guys in the back earlier about Stuart Woods and how Stone Barrington may have been his alter ego. In some ways, to me, Ashe Gayne is who I would want to be if I could die and come back as someone. I'd come back as Ashe Gayne.
I see. Well, it's great that you feel him, and he has a great relationship. It started in the last book, I think, but he has a very cool romance thing going on.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic with his father, who is he's retired, but he's a really renowned psychiatrist.
Yeah. So,
but he also has some people up in big power in Chicago. The woman he plays golf with,
Penny.
She's Penny. She's a really interesting character that you wouldn't think they would have any sort of relationship, but they do.
Well, because I think that I'm a selfish writer. I write like I like to read, and I like good characters that have depth to them, that have more dimensions, and I also like relationships. I think that relationships are very striking. So the relationship with his dad is very strained. His dad is old school, and his dad wants him to be a certain way, and that's just not what Ashe wanted. And so they've always had this strained relationship. The mother has died, and so the two of them are trying to come back together, and it's not an easy road for them. Ashe admires his dad, but he also is infuriated by his dad because his dad kind of holds on to what he could have been rather than accept that Ashe is happy in what he is doing now. But Ashe admires him and he loves him. And so they're trying to figure out, it's this male father son relate. How do we get back to a place where we're both happy? That's one relationship. The other relationship with Penny is one of my favorite relationships. Penny is a very wealthy white woman, a little older, whose name is carved into buildings all around the city. By the way, this is based on a real person. And he forms a relationship with her over golf. Because golf is that unifying thing, by the way. You know, golf and music are some of the greatest unifiers. Good music is good music, whether it's black, white, it doesn't matter. You know, Asian, Hispanic. And same thing with golf. Like people who love golf, you're a golfer, you can talk to another golfer for hours at a time, no matter where you come from. He forms a relationship with this very wealthy socialite, Penny Packer. And this relationship actually helps him because she has connections and inside,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
And she also likes getting the dirt from him. Like you said that I've shown you in Chicago you didn't know, Penny Packer loves seeing a side of Chicago that she doesn't normally interact with through Ashe Gayne.
Right. So I remember Chicago as being absolutely rife with music clubs. And I don't know, does the Blue Note even exist anymore?
I don't know if the Blue Note still exists, but Buddy Guys is there. I mean, it still exists. It's not.
Well, there were
The scene's
some,
not like it used to be.
yeah, there were some great places.
Yeah.
But the Blue Note, they were very forces where Duke Ellington hung out and some of the great jazz guys. They would play at Ravinia in the summer. I can remember Jerry Mulligan and going up there for all of that. But the Blue Note had a Coke section, so that you could go there even if you were underage. You could sit. They put you in the Coke section, so you could actually go to these clubs. The other thing that was weird when I was in that age group was that girls could drink at 18 in Illinois, but boys had to be 21.
Really?
Yeah, it took the Vietnam War, to change the drinking age for young men
Sure.
down to 18. But girls were, so there was always a chance that if you found an older boyfriend, you could, even at 18, you could. But anyway, I spent well, I'm trying to remember the club down on the river where Peggy Lee used to sing all the time.
Oh,
And Errol Garner. Oh God, I loved Errol Garner. I followed him all over Chicago.
jeez, I know what you're talking about, and I can't.
You remember it's down. It
Yep.
was on the south side near Wacker Bridge. I
Yep,
think it
yep.
was. It was a very famous
Oh,
and
jeez.
quite elegant as compared to some of the other.
Yeah.
And then they'd all move to Ravinia in the summer.
Right.
So
To go up there,
we
Ravinia is
could,
beautiful.
yeah, we could go up there.
I think that the Chicago, the landscape of the city has changed, and which I find very interesting. And what I try to do with the books are very current. So I try to give people a real feel of what's going on in the city. The book before this, The Overnights, where the two anchor women are vying for the #1 spot, that was a real look into the media landscape of where Chicago is right now. So I really try to do each book. The book coming out next summer is called The Alderman.
Ah, you're going to get into the general corruption
So you-
that pervades Chicago. And in fact, you do in this book.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, and they think I'm being glib, but I'm being serious. Chicago is built on corruption. It is the trade of the city. It just works that way. The aldermen, for those who don't know Chicago, the alderman is like city council, and so the aldermen are like mini mayors in their own wards, and they run those wards, and they run them very interestingly. And if you Google Chicago aldermen, you will see how many have been indicted and convicted in the last 10 to 15 years. It's
Some of them are even hereditary.
yes.
I know. I mentioned my father earlier, who was possibly the most upright man that I've almost ever known. But even my father, when I first learned to drive, I was down doing something in Chicago and made an illegal turn or something, and I got pulled over and I got a ticket. So when I got home, I said to my dad, I've got to go to, here's my ticket. I said, I'm going to have to go down and go to court. And my dad smiled, and like 2 days later, he came back. And my father actually got my ticket canceled. I couldn't believe it. I was so shocked. And I was actually quite angry with him,
You were?
Well, sure. I mean,
You wanted to go to court?
no, but I didn't want him to do that. But it was so easy. There
the
was just
Chicago.
like some guy, right over there. And
It's
all
the
he
Chi-
had to say is, my kid got a ticket, fix it. And that was it.
It's the Chicago way.
Yeah, exactly.
It just is. And so that to me I'm not glorifying it. It is what it is. But to me, that adds a different dimension to Chicago. And the alderman, um, as you can imagine, gets into how this really works. And I'm not making this stuff up, by the way. You can Google this up
No,
and see
there's
what
a
the
whole sort of George Santos vibe going on there, and in
yeah
fact, in this book, part of this book depends upon the general corruption that we're
right.
talking about.
And I'm going to keep talking about it because I think that makes. I mean, I know all cities have corruption, but Chicago's a whole different universe. And I think that once again, when you're trying to write, I try to write stories with layers, and that layer is really, really has a lot of texture to it. And so I want to always dig into, especially from the mayor's office, the fifth floor, I call it. The mayor's office is just, Daley's gone now, but we've had
Both
two since
dailies.
both Dailies are gone now, and the son stayed long enough to beat out his dad as far as the longest serving. But it's a revolving door now. But I think it's a tough place politically, and it's from the old machine days, and it's not easy.
Well, and there was so much money because, Chicago being the center of the country,
Mm-hmm.
it was the stockyards, it
Yep.
was the railroads,
Yep.
it was all, and that's one reason it's such a beautiful city. There was enough money to build Lakeshore Drive. And you're right, the whole beachfront of Chicago is one of the most beautiful of any
Beautiful.
city.
In fact, the younger son, Daly, when people come to Chicago now, and the reason why the park is so beautiful, one of my favorite places, the Tuileries Gardens in Paris, when you're going to the Louvre, and you see these beautiful gardens walking to the Louvre, and Daly and his wife, who's no longer with us, but Daly and his wife went to Paris one time on a visit or something, and he was so impressed. He had never been there. He was so impressed by the beauty of Paris that when he came back to Chicago, he said, "I'm changing everything," and he's the mayor. And so he took Grant Park, which is our Central Park for those who know New York. He took Grant Park and just beautified it around Buckingham Fountain, which I think is one of the prettiest fountains, in the world. And he beautified it. And when you go there, you're like, wow, this is like an oasis. This is not the Chicago I hear about, on the news. But Daley did that. And one of my favorite stories about Daley leaning into the corruption part of this was there was an airport near the lake called Meigs Field. Meigs Field is right in the center. It's like San Diego, how San Diego's airport is right there. Meigs Field was right downtown in the middle of the city. But it could only take small planes. And so it couldn't take big passenger jets. It would take small planes. And most of the lobbyists and legislatures who worked in the southern part of Illinois would fly up north and land there. It was convenient for everybody. That's all who could really use it. Well, the mayor said, after he came back from Paris, it shouldn't be that way. First of all, only these state politicians are able to use it. The average bloke can't use it. And he said that big area could be a beautiful park. So they went back and forth. So you had the city of Chicago and you had the state arguing about who had control of this airport in the middle of the night. This is wonderful. In the middle of the night, he commands one of his departments to go out there and tear up the runway. They tore it up in the middle of the night. In the midst of all this legal stuff, that was the end of Meigs.
A lot of heavy machinery.
That was the end of Meigs Field.
I love it.
And now it's a beautiful park.
It is a beautiful park, but it's a lot more than just around Buckingham Fountain where we used to take blankets and go and sit on the grass and listen to concerts because it's not that far. We haven't even talked about the symphony and and lyric opera, which is other stuff I did. But the lakefront goes all the way down. I mean,
all the way south.
Yeah.
By the way, and it's beautiful all the way through.
That's right.
And by the way, it's interesting so Lakeshore Drive runs around the lake. When you come to Chicago, you got to drive Lakeshore Drive from north to south, all the way out to Evanston to Northwestern. But it's interesting to see, if you pay attention, if you travel from north to south or south to north, it's interesting to see the changing landscape of Chicago. That landscape changing tells the story of Chicago. Going through the museums in downtown, then going out to Evanston, which is, as you know, beautiful, and going up north, but then heading south, where it's beautiful, but then it gets tough sometimes in part of the South Side. But it's just the yacht club. It's just a really beautiful, beautiful
Do you
city.
know what Chicago actually means in Indian?
I did know what it meant.
Place of the pig.
Yeah.
It was an absolute mud hole. and the city was built on this huge marsh mud hole thing at the end of Lake Michigan, and it still has, traces. There's a lot of and I mean, there's never been a really great subway system in Chicago.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, but
It's
it
not
was
New
more
York.
like the L and
It's the
everything. But
L.
part
It's
of
the
it is because it was a slippery place to try to drill underground.
yes, it is. Well because of it's right there on the lake. The other part of it is that the second book in the series, Wolf Point, takes place at a place called Wolf Point that was named after the Native Americans had a name for it, and that area. The second book is about the president of the school board is found what they thought was he had committed suicide. He's found half submerged in the Chicago River at Wolf Point, um, based on a true story, by the way. It's true. Yeah, the school board was found there, and so when I read about that case, it didn't make sense to me. I said, how could this guy, who is connected to the mayor, who's a great friend of the mayor, who's an African American guy from the South Side, always dressed to the nines, very politically connected, very successful. He goes and shoots himself, puts a bullet in his head at Wolf Point, which was rat infested, trash strewn, and they find his Cadillac sitting here, and he's half submerged in the Chicago River.
You didn't believe that.
I didn't believe it.
You did not believe that.
So I wrote this book called Wolf Point, which is what if he didn't do it. Now here's the crazy thing about it. I had no inside knowledge about it, by the way. I just, as an author and creator, I just thought, what if he really didn't do that? And everyone thought that I had some kind of inside knowledge of this because people who knew the guy, I didn't know him, but people kept coming to me and saying, holy cow, we thought the same thing. I was like, whoa, I just made this stuff up. But I just had dinner with someone 2 weeks ago, and he said, oh my goodness, I couldn't stop reading Wolf Point. He said, everything you said made sense. We all had the same kind of questions. So it's just interesting how fiction works sometimes, I guess.
Well, it really is. I know. So tell us about the book that's coming out in January, your nonfiction
Yes.
book.
So in January, I have a book called Eat Your Age. And for those who are at home, you can order it from here because we'll make sure we have some here. But Eat Your Age is a book that takes every decade of your life starting in your 30s. And it breaks down what are your top 10 nutrients that you need to be eating during this decade. What are the best exercises for you? Because what you do in your 30s, you may not need to be able to do in your 60s. What are the most important tests you need? What diseases do you need to look out for? It breaks it down by decade. And at the end of each decade, I give you a 30-day meal plan, not necessarily a diet plan, but a meal plan so that you can load up on all those nutrients that will help you live longer, feel better, and be happier. And so I'm excited about this book. This book has a lot of good information. I'll be on Good Morning America on the 8th of January talking about it. And then today's show on the 9th talking about it. So people, set your calendars, but you can watch. But yeah, it's called Eat Your Age. I also created a recipe book for it too. So there's an Eat Your Age official recipe book, which is just 150 very simple recipes that anyone can. If I can cook it, you can cook it. And that's my motto. They're TASH is what I say. It's tasty, affordable, simple, healthy. So everything from black bean and sweet potato tacos to a chicken pasta. I mean, just good basic stuff, but simple stuff that you don't have to break the bank on. People are hurting, trying to buy this food is crazy prices. But so I wanted to create a book that people can eat well with their family and not have to break the bank.
Your book is probably too late for me now. I mean,
Never.
come on.
Why?
Yeah. Why? Well, I'm in my 80s. I've missed all those decades where I could have been doing good stuff.
Absolutely not. I mean, listen. I mean, I tell people all the time when it comes to health, it's never too late unless you're in the ground. Number one. Number two. I would say this to you though. You know what? I would say to any. First of all, I was talking to the guys before this in the back about this, but particularly to women, I think the one mistake that women make as they age is they don't lift weights.
Yeah, I believe you're right.
Women have to lift weights when you get
Okay.
older. You lose muscle mass,
Right.
muscle atrophy. And the loss of muscle mass contributes to a lot of problems. It contributes to posture issues of being hunched over, joint problems, balance issues, metabolism slowing, weightlifting. As a physician, if I had to prescribe just one thing to be healthier, it would be
Lift
exercise
weights.
and lifting weights.
So when I carry tubs of books out of here, guys, don't take them away from me. That's
She
probably
needs it.
I probably well, actually, that is true. I mean, I do make an effort to try to carry them a lot of the time.
Uh,
Just because of I'm not doing enough weightlifting.
I'm telling you, it's magical. It's good for your blood pressure. It's good for it releases
Okay, you've
endorphins.
convinced me. I'm
Okay.
going to do that.
Okay.
All
Good.
right,
All right.
great.
And I want people at home to do that. It's important. And I'm not saying you have to spend money on fancy trainers either. By the way.
Right, does picking up puppies count? I mean, I have 21-pound puppies, and I pick them up all day
Can
long.
you curl them?
No, you'd be
If
surprised how No, I mean, I walk them a couple of miles every day, and but they like being picked up, so I'm forever doing that.
Let me tell you something. When I was in the hospital, my specialty is rehab medicine. So if you had a stroke or a traumatic brain injury or a fall, you know, you come to my services, okay? And I try to get you back together, up and running. But I'll never forget when I was training as a young doctor, we would have people come on the ward who were executives, white collar guys, business guys, lawyers, whatever, those kind of professionals. Then we'd have the manual guys, street sanitation guys, butchers, guys who work with their hands a lot. To the person, the guys that bounced back the fastest and had the greatest recovery were the manual guys. No question. The executives never fully regained 100%, always stayed a week later than the other guys. The rehab was longer, more grueling. Those guys who've been working with their hands and have been physical their whole life, out of there in no time and back at it. That says a lot to me, that we have to be physical through our entire life. Yes, it's going to change when you're 30 versus when you're 50 and 60, but you have to remain physical. And by not being physical, you are giving in to the ravages that can occur with, mindless aging.
Okay, so if you haven't been doing it, is it too late to start doing it?
No,
No, it's
it's
not
not.
too late.
But you
Right.
have to start in increments,
Okay.
small things.
Like a puppy.
You like a puppy.
Okay.
Here's the problem. When people watch, for example, Wimbledon, um, after Wimbledon, the parks are full of people trying to play tennis, and people trying to, do all this stuff, and they burn themselves out. Okay, people watch the marathon. Oh, I'm going to start running. Okay, it's good to have that as motivation, but you have to start in a way that you don't overwhelm yourself. And so what I say to people is start small, 15 minutes, 3 days a week. That's it. You probably could do more, but don't do more. 15 minutes, 3 days a week, and then every 10 days, maybe go to 20 minutes now, 3 days a week. So you got to slowly work your way. So it becomes part of your routine. People want to automatically start with an hour. My wife is like this, by the way. We just had this conversation yesterday. And she finally relented to me and said she agrees with me. She wants to go in and do everything at once. And then she burns herself out. Right? She's overwhelmed. And so now she said to me the other day, she says, Ian, you're right. Program me, I'm willing to do in steps. I'm like, thank you. But it took a long time to get there.
Love it. Okay, well, I will keep that in mind. So you all didn't know when you came to, watch all this that we were going to be talking medicine, but I think it's great to get really good advice. There are a lot of people who are in bad shape or die young for no good reason.
That's as a doctor and as a human being, that's very sad to me. You got one shot here, right? And my career on the medicine side has been to try to give people the information and the tools to live the best life they can live. It doesn't matter to me where you come from. I don't care what your political views are. I could care less. My job is to try to help you live the best life and the longest life possible, because we're all going to leave.
How are you reconciling your medical career and your writing? I mean, how are you structuring your days so that you manage to do both?
Well, I don't practice, so that makes it easy. No, most of my days are from the medical side. I'm either appearing on TV or I'm appearing giving talks to companies or organizations. I do that a lot. Or I work with people online and help people online. So that's mostly kind of what I do. Or I write my books, my medical books. And then I write my novels. And so I have a really nice flow to my life where I'm left and right brained. And it's wonderful. And they feed each other. And it gets hectic and chaotic, but it's it's good for me. I'm always writing something and thinking about what the next project is. I have 3 more books already lined up in my head for my nonfiction, and like I said, I'm writing a love story, kind of like a romantic thriller. I love love stories. I'm writing a romantic thriller, not thriller like someone died, that kind of thriller, but thriller meaning it's a page turner.
Okay.
Because sometimes romances are slow burns, but I want it to be I want it to be a page turner romance where you're like, I got to get to the next page, and there's more than just like the love happening. It's got to be some other stuff happening. So I'm writing that now.
Are
Actually,
you
I
going to
finished
go
it.
on with Ashe as well?
Oh yeah, Ash. My goal is to write 10 Ash Canes
Okay.
and then do a spin-off
Ah.
of his sidekick, Mechanic. Ash's sidekick is a Lithuanian guy named Mechanic, and they have a great rapport. And Mechanic is a very violent guy. Mechanic shoots first and he asks later. And people love Mechanic. My cousin said to me, "You never give him enough time in the book." So I think if I could do several more Ash Canes and get him established, then I'm going to write a Mechanic series because I think he'd be a fun character to write. You
So
know?
we haven't actually mentioned briefly what Eagle Rock is about,
Oh,
but it starts with a very interesting death of a very wealthy player in Chicago,
from your neck of the woods, by the way.
right? Who's found dead in a kind of almost like a locked room in a place nobody or almost nobody, so clearly somebody knew that he was living. So kind of a secret hideaway for him.
Mm-hmm.
And the question, then is, why was he there? What was he doing? And who killed him? And how did they do it? I mean, that sums it up, right?
Yeah. So Elliot Cantor is one of Chicago's wealthiest men, and he's found in a very compromised position, wearing interesting things in this secret apartment in Lincoln Park that no one really knew about. And what happens, the way the book opens up, is that Ashe Gayne, our guy, is sleeping, and Commander Rory Burke, who is with CPD, who used to be Ash's mentor, and they're still friends, very gruff, kind of Irish guy, calls up Ashe Gayne and says, "You need to get down here." He says, "It's the middle of the night. Get down and do what?" He says, "You're going to take this case." And he says, "Here's the address." He comes down, and basically Rory Burke, this is how Chicago works, Rory Burke is with the son at the deceased secret apartment, and they're trying to figure out not only just how to solve it, but how to make this go away so it doesn't hit the papers. And Ashe Gayne is the guy to handle that. And so,
Right. So it's not just a death; it's a disgraceful death,
yes,
and it's not going to be good for anybody
nobody.
if it becomes a media sensation.
That's right. And so they
Yeah.
call Ashe in. Ashe, of course, says no. He's not interested. If he gets, because he doesn't care that the guy is so wealthy, doesn't money doesn't motivate Ashe Gayne. But then something else happens that motivates him, and he takes the case. And then the ride begins, and it's quite a ride. It's a fun ride.
Right. So, Patrick, anybody question?
Let's see. Can you repeat the question just for the people watching? This is good.
Ian can.
Why is Keith Richards still alive and Richard Simmons isn't?
Why is Keith Richards still alive and Richard Simmons is not?
That's a really great
You
question.
said Mick Jagger, but we know why Mick Jagger's still alive.
Yeah.
Because he keeps himself in shape.
Yeah. There are people who just have ridiculous genetics, who they have such good genes that regardless of how badly they treat themselves, their genes actually are saviors for them. It's true. My wife's great grandmother lived to be 98, and she drank a pack of beer every day and smoked a pack of cigarettes and lived to be 98. I can't explain it. I mean, it's just these people have really good genes. So, unfortunately for Richard Simmons, we don't know what really happened to Richard Simmons, which I think is very sad because I was very inspired by Richard Simmons as a kid. We don't know what happened to him, but to me, he died young for a guy who'd been in the fitness industry for so long. But we just don't know what really happened to him. But he just didn't have the genes. That I can tell you, he didn't have
Do
genes.
you remember? I can't think of the guy's name, but on this point, there was a fitness guy. He was a runner, and his father died in his 40s of a heart attack. So this guy was resolved to keep himself in shape and run and avoid his father's death. And sure enough, when he got to be the same age as his father, one day he died. His heart gave out,
That
and
is
he was quite famous. I can't think of
uh,
his name.
that is completely hereditary. That they had a cardiac, you know, almost like breast cancer for some women if they have a certain breast cancer gene, BRCA. But people have that where, and it's very sad. David Letterman, for example, as skinny as he was, had bypass surgery because he had high cholesterol and he ran like crazy. And as skinny as he was, as much as he ran, he had familial hypercholesterolemia, which means that no matter what he did, his cholesterol levels wouldn't go down, and he had triple bypass. Um, it's just unfortunately, some people are dealt a very bad hand, genetically speaking.
It'll be interesting to see what CRISPR can do to help some people.
What?
Especially CRISPR, that's gene editing
Oh, yes,
technology,
yes,
where they're using it,
yes,
to try to catch spina bifida in the
yes.
womb, for example, and fix it before anybody is born with that horrible problem. And
I think there are a lot of good things on the horizon. The more we learn about the DNA and genetics, the better we're able to analyze and do things. Generations behind us are going to benefit.
right.
I believe that that people will live to be 200 years old at one point if we don't ruin the world with climate. That people will be able to live to 200.
Any other questions? Yes. Wait. There's one behind you. Sorry.
My question is about continue on Ashe Gayne, and as we know, Chicago holds a lot of secrets. Will we ever see Ashe Gayne do anything with the Kennedy family and the Mercantile Exchange?
Ooh, that's a good question. You mean when Joe bought the election for JFK?
The question is, will Chicago has a lot of secrets. Will we ever see anything with Ashe Gayne doing something with the Kennedy family? So the Kennedy family has had a big history in Chicago, not just that election, but also they owned, I don't know if they're still owning that, but Merchandise Mart, which is a huge building in Chicago.
On the river, isn't
On
it?
the river, right on the river. Big. I was just in there last week. And so the question is, will Ashe Gayne ever interact with them? The answer is probably yes, because in my books, I do a lot of research. I know as a fiction writer, I can just make stuff up. I like stuff to be pegged to the reality. The streets all go the right way. The names are all right, and I also like the research of the history of the city. And so the Kennedys do have a significant historical place in Chicago, and I could see Ashe in some way interacting with the family. I probably won't call them the Kennedys, but I could see him interacting with a family that is like the Kennedys for sure. That's a good question, by the way.
There's a question about the Ashe Gayne's name, where that came from, and also what do you see as some of his flaws?
That's a good question. So Ash's name comes from his dad. His dad is a tennis fanatic, and so his dad wanted to name him after Arthur Ashe, the first black, the only black actually, to win Wimbledon. And so his dad wanted his son, because he wanted his son. Part of the issues these guys have is that his dad wanted him to be a famous tennis player, and Ashe was a good tennis player, but he hurt himself and it just wasn't his thing, and so he names him Ashe. That's where that name came from. What's the other part of it?
What do you see as some of his flaws?
Oh yeah. So Ashe is not perfect, and I think that any hero that's perfect is a very boring hero. Ashe is very flawed in relationships, romantic relationships. He doesn't do well. He got dropped by his fiancee, and so he's just kind of out there struggling, trying to make it happen. He does have a love interest, and he just can't. You know what it reminds me of? Because I love Robert B. Parker.
Susan?
Yeah.
Right.
I always thought that relationship that Parker created between Spencer and Susan was absolutely fantastic.
Have you read the continuations?
I stopped.
Well, you know what? Mike Lupica, I'll give you a copy. He's absolutely great. You will like what he's done with Spencer and Susan.
Does he have the same cadence?
Mhm.
Parker had such a cadence.
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna try it. I'll try it based on your recommendation.
I'll give you one to take home.
Okay. So Ashe is not great in relationships. He also struggles with kind of rectifying or reconciling his past with his dad and being able to handle that situation. He doesn't do very well. He's also, I mean, it's great that he's very kind of irreverent, but sometimes to a fault. You know, it kind of can get him in trouble a little bit. And so, yeah, he's not perfect. I mean, he also in the first couple of books, there's a little vigilantism in there, and it's Ash doing what he thinks the law or the judicial system did not do to really bad people, and he takes it into his own hands. People were conflicted about that element. I like that element, by the way. Ash kind of meted out some street justice to some people because he felt as though
Well, if he's not a cop, you know, then
that's part of what he
doesn't-
could do.
Right.
And he was doing it to heinous people. I mean, people who did really bad things. But some readers were unsure of that, but I felt very sure about that because I think that all of us at some point see a situation and say, if I was a police officer or if I was a judge, I would do this. Well, Ash does that for us.
He's a bad man and he needs killing.
There
Now,
you go.
That's the line right
That's the
there.
line.
Yeah.
There's
Yes,
no-
sir.
Another question. So you're into health. Why did you make Ash a healthy guy?
Well, the question is, I'm into health. Why is Ashe Gayne not a health guy? But Ashe Gayne is very healthy. He's very fit. He runs a lot. He lifts a lot. He boxes a lot. He's very fit. And some people have actually, on top of your question, have said to me, well, you should make him follow one of the programs, one of your diet or food programs. I found that to be quite interesting. But I also didn't want to weigh him down with the idea that, let me back up for a second. When you say health, people have a reaction to it. You know what I mean? Like they have a reflex. And so I don't want people to be turned off to that this guy is this perfect, you know, he's healthy, he's a health nut, he only eats well. For example, he goes and eats Italian beef, which is a famous sandwich in Chicago. So he'll eat Italian beef with Rory Burke, with the commander, as he's getting some inside information from the cops. So he's a healthy kind of guy, but you know, he's not the health guy.
No, but wouldn't that be an interesting crossover? I sort of like that idea that you could cross over your nonfiction
I
into
know.
your. I don't know anybody else who could actually do that.
People
And
keep saying that. I may
yeah.
try that actually. It won't happen in the Alderman, but maybe in the future it will happen.
Maybe you could stumble upon your recipe book.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't hurt.
No. Sorry, another question there, Patrick?
Well, Rex Stout wouldn't be a good example, would he?
No.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about your writing routine? When do you write? The morning, the night? When do you work out? What is your day like?
Yeah, I have a pretty. The question is, can I tell you about my routine? When do I write? When do I work out? My process is pretty straightforward. I'm a very early morning guy. I'm typically in the gym by 5:30. I like to be up early in the morning because everyone else is sleeping. I can get a lot of work done. I'm very focused, and so I'm up early. The first thing I do is I hit the gym, and I'm able to. And I'm very quiet in the gym. I have my headphones on, and I'm typically writing on my phone while I'm in between sets. So I'm thinking what's happening. And then I get home, I have a family, and so it's family time for a little bit till everyone goes their different directions, and then the day is mine. If I'm in a writing zone, I have a very structured writing schedule, and I base it on the number of pages I want to accomplish that day. And so I'll say I want to hit this number of pages, and I try to get most of them done in my first writing session. If I don't get most of them done because people are bothering me with emails and phone calls and stuff, then that unfortunately means I have to bleed over into an afternoon session. And so then I'll keep writing until I hit my page count. But I'm very determined about my page counts. And then what I do, before I even write anything, though, I spend the first 2 to 3 months writing a book in my head. I don't write anything. I don't write to an outline. I know a lot of people do, but my process is not outlined. Outlines for me are very restrictive because I don't want to think through the whole book and then sit down and start writing it, and then I can't deviate because I said I got to go this way. Because sometimes I was intending on going left, but I end up going right because something comes to me. So I find a beginning point. Openings are always very important to me. I find my middle. I find my end. I describe my top five main characters, brief descriptions, and then I write. So that when I write, it's a very easy process because I know where I'm going, right? I'm not a writer who sits down and just says, okay, let's just figure out. Something else I got from Robert Parker, by the way, was I was listening to one of his interviews, and he said he never stops writing when he runs out of ideas. He always keeps an idea so that the next time he sits down, he has some place to start, and you can keep going. I love that. So I'm very similar. I always make sure that I know where I'm going next. I never come back the next day or later that night, and I'm like, okay, what do I do now? And so that's my process. So I figured I finished the book. I write into my computer. I'm a very fast typist, very fast, and so I can write. My wham, which is what we learned in high school typing. By the way, it's interesting. Someone asked me the other day, what courses have helped me most in life? And I said, typing. And when
I agree with you.
right? And I said that when I was a high school, I was a big jock in high school, and everyone had to take typing. Guys, girls, everyone had to take it. And I was pissed. What am I doing taking typing? Like, typing's for girls. I had to take it. But I also was very competitive. And so I said, okay, if I got to take this typing, I want to have the fastest wham of anyone in the typing class. So I really worked at it. Well, my goodness, did that help me? When I got to college, procrastinating or jamming, it didn't matter to me because I knew that I could sit down and type this paper out in an hour without a problem. Well, now in my writing life, I just type like the wind. And so I can write very fast. And so I write my book first I was with my friend Rachel Ray last week. She writes her books by hand.
There are people who still do that.
By hand. First of all, my fingers would be falling. I can't imagine holding a pencil that long, but she writes it by hand. Then she puts it into the computer. I go straight to my computer. Once I'm done, then I print it out. And then I do a physical edit because I can't edit on a computer. I actually need the pages. So I print it out. I put in this nice portfolio, and I edit in pencil. I input my changes. I like to have very clean copies. I do first drafts. I don't like sloppy first drafts. I don't like edits. So I try to be as clean as possible before I get it to my agent or my editor so that it's not a whole bunch of, rewrite this. Another interesting, I know I keep talking about Parker, but I really love Parker's style. Parker once said that that when he handed in his drafts, he wanted them to be so clean that they didn't even change the punctuation. Now, no one's perfect, but that's how he liked to deliver his books.
He also wrote leanly, so that
Very
there
leanly.
wasn't
Yes.
a lot of editing. Patrick's done a lot of editing, just like I have. Is taking out, as Elmar Leonard said, the words that readers skip. Parker never even put them in there, so it wasn't necessary.
He was tight, wasn't he? His writing.
Yeah,
Tight.
and of course they got smaller as he got older.
Yeah.
We have a lot of Parker stories. He was here a lot.
I
Right.
wish I could have met that guy.
Oh, I'm sorry you didn't.
Yeah, me too. Anyway, so that's my process. So I hand into my editor or my agent a very clean draft because as a writer, the least favorite part, which I remind my wife every book, is edits. It's just a waste of my time. I want to keep creating. I don't want to go back and deal with independent clauses.
Back, yeah. Let me ask you. You put your big career kind of like on hold to write books. How scary is that, and what do you recommend for people who want to do that?
The question was, I put my big career with a small b on hold to write books. How scary is that, and what do I recommend for people who want to do something like that? Well, I've always been fortunate that my big career that pays the bills has done very well. And so it gives me the latitude to take risks in my publishing. I do not recommend, and it's individual preferences, I don't typically recommend the whole starving artist routine. I mean, it's just doesn't fit me. Some people are okay with that. I think that people should test the temperature of the waters while they're doing their regular thing and see if they can get a rhythm going. And if you feel like that it's something that can become something, then jump ship. I believe in reducing the amount of risk that you take when it comes to careers like that. That's just me. I'm conservative in that way, right? I also have a family, so I got to take care of my family. But I just think that you should do that. You should have your big thing, and if you want to become a writer, which I would love for everyone to become a writer, actually, because I think writing, creating stories, the world can't have enough good stories. But I think that people shouldn't just abandon what they've been doing in order to do that. I think they should do it on the side. I mean, Grisham did it, right? Grisham was writing his legal pads during his cases, writing stories. To me, I think that's what you do. And then you finally reach a point where you say, okay, I'm going to go for it. And I think that for me, I've never given up my main gig, but I definitely gave more time to doing my writing, and my writing has become equally big as my TV gigs.
Does that help? Manage risk.
That's right.
Right. As long as you manage it, you should, risk taking shouldn't be scary, but you never want to bet the whole farm
That's
on any one thing.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I have a good last question, which is, what is your golf handicap?
What is my golf handicap? Jeez.
Are you going to be truthful?
Of course I'm going to be truthful. I'm always truthful. It's just I'm very sad because I just only played 3 times this year. It's heresy. I'm a 9. I probably should be a 7, but between 8 and 9. But some days I'm playing like a 6 or 7. Golf is one of those sports where you just got to keep playing.
There are people all over the world who would actually kill to have a 9 handicap. So it's really not, I realize for you, but seriously, that, getting down under double digits is the dream
I
of
know.
most golfers.
That's what Ashe is trying to do, by the way. He's trying to get under a 10, and I understand that. But I'm very competitive. So if I would love to be a 4.
Why 4? Is it a magic number?
It's just like when someone's a 4, that means that there are a couple of rounds a year that they're playing scratch. They're hitting par a couple times a year.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, it's really been a wonderful discussion. I knew it was going to be great because we'd practiced earlier, but nonetheless, thank you very much. It was a real treat to have you here, Ian. Thank you very much, audience, for joining us and for your questions. And we have a few. We've actually sold most of our copies of Eagle Rock, but we still have some. And we have the earlier Ashe Gayne paperbacks, of which there are 3. So you don't have to read them in order, but it doesn't hurt to start at the beginning if you haven't read him at all. So that's it.
And I just want to say thank you very much. And for those who are at home, please continue to support independent bookstores. They are the lifeblood of writers, and I think what you're doing is absolutely fantastic. I'm very honored to have been in a room of so many other great writers. So thank you for the opportunity.
It's our pleasure. Right. Are you turning it off? Right. Patrick has got the control there for the virtual thing, so he has to go and turn it off. Right. I love it. It's an interesting thing, Ian, because we don't normally get a lot of questions. It's more like they all make comments, and talk to each other. So obviously.